Hey, Joey Starr here for Starr Quality Kitchen. It's been too long since I've made a cooking video, so today I will make Brazilian feijoada. Feijoada is essentially a hearty stew made primarily of beans and pork, with a smaller portion of beef. In fact, the root word for feijoada is feijão, which means beans in Portuguese. And because Carnaval is upon us, it is the perfect time to dive into this dish. That's not to say that feijoada is exclusive to Carnaval, because it's not. Just about any weekend is really good for feijoada, but it is eaten far more frequently by many more people during Carnaval. I've seen it firsthand in Brazil. Now, feijoada has a long-standing history in Brazil, as well as other Portuguese-speaking countries. And there are so many theories and stories about where and when it started in Brazil. But I was always told growing up that it was originally the meal of servants and the very poor who were left with the undesirable cuts of pork and beef. So they combined that with beans, since beans was always very cheap, to create this stew that was not only easy to make in a large batch with minimal cost, and also very filling, and thus able to satiate a large number of people across several meals. And naturally, the stew was so delicious that the higher class citizens wanted it too. Like most traditional dishes in Brazil, the recipe varies a lot by region, family, and resources. Depending on what's in hand at your local market, maybe your farm or your local butcher, you might swap around ingredients and thus never really make it the same way twice. This will be my own version based partially on tradition, my upbringing, and what I was able to find in my area. So naturally, you're gonna need some ingredients to make your feijoada. You got your carne seca, your dried beef. You got your paio sausage. You got your linguiça, which is a mild Portuguese sausage. A pound of dried black beans. Pork tails, woo! Pork ears, pork hocks. Pork feet, pig's feet, trotters, whatever the name is, get that little area with the hoof of the pig and gallop back home with it. I'm going to use a bit of this fresh batch of tempero pronto. If you don't know what that is or how to make it, I'll leave a link to my recipe for it in the description box below. Don't worry, I'm not going to use this whole thing because that'd be a way too salty, way too intense, but I'll use a little bit of it. A good medium-sized onion. I opted to use a white onion here, but a nice Vidalia would do, or any kind of white or yellow onion. Honestly, you can probably use red onion if you wanted to. It's really down to a preference. I don't think you can really go wrong with the onion, but I do recommend something that's either yellow or white. You do have a lot of flexibility as far as your meats go, because really feijoada was something that was kind of thrown together, as I was saying before. I'm going for a more traditional route, which I'm using the quote-unquote undesirable parts of the pig, the stuff that's not mainly used, like your ears and your tails and feet and hocks, of course. But depending on the region of Brazil that you're in, or even just the household that you're in, they may use some different pork parts, like the pork shoulder, or even some of the more premium cuts. My understanding is if you go out to Sao Paulo and you go to the restaurants there, that they're using the premium pork cuts for their feijoada, and that's fine. I'm sure it's delicious and probably better than whatever I'm gonna make here because they're trained professionals and I'm the guy with a food vlog. But again, I decided to go a bit more traditional like I am with this recipe. So the first thing you wanna do is you'll wanna soak your carne seca, paio sausage, and linguiça for 24 hours. So this is the first thing you wanna do. You wanna plan this ahead. Next, you'll want to soak your beans overnight in water. Just put them in the bowl with the water, pop it into the fridge, and turn in for the night. Pro tip, you'll want to make sure that you use a container that's at least twice as large as what the beans will fit into, because as they soak in the water, they're going to expand in size by quite a bit. And naturally, going with the tradition, the idea of that this is a bean stew, you'll want to take these parts and cut them up into bite-size or not much larger than bite-size pieces where reasonably applicable. I like to cut my onions into kind of these bigger pieces, bearing in mind that they're going to be in that stew a really long time, and they're going to become transparent and translucent. They're going to shrink more than George coming out of the pool. Cut my linguiça accordingly. Chop up the paio sausage into these little bite-sized pieces, after removing the casing, of course, unless you don't like your stomach. I'm going to be using this Dutch oven pot to make mine in. A lot of people make it that way, but if you want to go pure traditional, you really want to make it in a clay pot which I do not have. What you want to do is you pour in your soaked beans, then you start adding in your meats, your soaked meats and your pig parts and your sausages. Throw them all in there. Linguiça and patio sausage, carne seca. Toss in the rest of your pork stuff and your onions. I threw a couple of tablespoons of tempero pronto in there, and now I got it all in the pot. I filled it with water, and now I'm going to set this bad boy on high to bring it to a boil. Once you've brought it to a boil, you'll want to reduce your heat down to a simmer, at which point we get into the long portion of the recipe. Allowing it to simmer, the goal here is to make sure you have enough water to keep your beans submerged until they're fully cooked and tender. You're probably looking somewhere in a ballpark of about 4 to 6 hours. So you'll want to check it every hour for the first like 2 to 3 hours, and after that maybe every half hour. Just test your beans, make sure they're tender. Similar to my black bean recipe. And similarly with that recipe and also my rice recipe, and a pro move, I also boil a kettle of water so that when it's time to add water to this, then I'm not bringing the temperature of the contents down by adding cold water. I'm matching the level of heat to keep the cooking time down. The crazy thing here is that all I've done was bring this to a boil, and it's only been simmering about maybe 2-3 minutes. And even though there's so much cooking time left on this bad boy, the aroma in this kitchen is just so amazing. So when the feijoada is done, your beans will be completely tender, and you can have this nice, thick consistency going. And of course, all your pork will be fall off the bone. This is basically done. I just turned off the stove and I'm just gonna let it sit for a bit. Now's the perfect time for me to just whip together my sides. So, prepared myself a nice plate. Kind of a traditional way to serve feijoada. I got some Brazilian white rice, of course. I kind of got a little carried away on the amount of feijoada I put on the plate for my first serving, but it smelled so good I just couldn't stop myself. Also included some traditional farofa. I also made myself a little plate of orange slices, which is traditionally eaten with feijoada to help cut down to some of the richness and fattiness of the feijoada, you know, bearing in mind that because we're using those cuts of pork, this is a little high on the fat content. This will help you with the digestion. And also something that I recommend, I don't hear people say enough, I'm having coffee. I definitely recommend you have coffee or tea with this because again, since there's a high fat content, when it goes into your stomach, if you're drinking something cold, it's gonna make that fat congeal, and A, you're not gonna be able to eat as much, and B, you're gonna feel kind of bloated and yucky. So first thing, the aroma. We already had the idea while I was cooking it. I mean, the whole kitchen, really the whole apartment smells like feijoada right now. And I'm the last person that's going to complain about that. It's such a delicious aroma. I basically was salivating for the last 4 hours while this thing was cooking. It's not the prettiest thing to look at. What it lacks in visual beauty, it makes up for in hardiness and deliciousness, I can assure you. Obviously, as I've been cooking along, I've been kind of picking at it a little bit because let's face it, the meats are ready far before the beans are. So there's a point where you start to sample some of the goods as you're checking the progress of the stew. But let me not waste any more time because I actually am starting to salivate once again. So first thing I want to do is I just want to grab a little bit of just, let me see if I can get just some of the bean and the stew in there. See, like so. All right. Yeah, there's a couple little pork shreds in there, but that's okay. I just want to see how the beans came out. Completely tender. Kind of picked up a bit of the smoke flavor from the linguiça and paio sausage. That's good. It also helped pick up some of the salt from those items and the tempero pronto that I put in here. So something to keep in mind. Now, if you make a batch and you didn't quite have a pound of beans in there, or you had more of the salted meats and more of the salt than maybe what was recommended for the amount of feijoada you're making, then your feijoada is going to end up being a little saltier. So something to bear in mind that the amount of beans helps take in some of that salt. But the salt is another reason why the rice is kind of traditional. You want to make your rice as kind of plain as possible. I mean, maybe use a little seasoning, make sure it still tastes like something, like I show you in my how to make Brazilian rice video, link down below. Keep that salt to a minimal because it's one of the few cases where I say yes, it's easier to add a little salt later than it is to take salt away. But if you have to take salt away, then having a bit of rice in there to take in with your feijoada is a pretty good way to go, because it kind of evens it out. In fact, I'm going to try some of the feijoada. Again, I'm going mostly bean here to go with the white rice. In fact, full disclosure, my feijoada is a little bit on the salty side because I broke my own rule. When I was adding the tempero pronto, I didn't really measure. That's fine. This is still delicious. Let me try some of the pork. Now, all I did was take the ladle, dip in there, and flopped it on here. So I don't even know everything that I grabbed. But something to bear in mind is that because I included ham hocks and pig's feet, there's going to be some amount of bone in here. You just want to be a little bit careful. Let me see here. Looks like I got a piece of linguiça. Or it might be, yeah, this is a piece of linguiça. First thing, the linguiça that I bought was really good to begin with. The way that the meats take in some of that flavoring from the beans, it is such a beautiful blend. There's something about pork and beans that they just really mesh well together, especially if you're making this kind of pork and beans. Not that American traditional kind that I don't like, no offense, it's just, I've never liked it, and I have a little bit of a childhood trauma tied to that, but that's a story for another time. Now, although I do have a knife here, it shouldn't be necessary because for how long this has been stewing, all of your pork that does include the bones, like the pig's feet and ham hock, it should just come right off. It should just come right off the bone naturally because it's cooked so well. This is a nice fatty piece I want to get into. That's good. That's part of the ham hock. I think the only thing that won't be like necessarily melt in your mouth right away, but still not require much chewing, is your pig ears. I got a piece of the pig ear here. Because there's a little bit of cartilage in those pig ears, although you can eat it because it's very thin. Still pretty good. Take a little more of the ear here. That ear, just, you don't even have to chew. Like, the only chewing that I'm doing right now is for the rice, because the beans are perfectly tender. The pork is fall off the bone, melt in your mouth. I mean, it's just barely retaining the properties of a solid. All right, so let's get a little bit with the farofa in here. I'm sure a lot of people watching this video don't even know what farofa is, and that's fine. I'm not gonna get into a real explanation here other than say that it's a bit of fried flour that, at least that is, whose purpose is basically to just kind of to mix with your savory meats, particularly juicy savory meats, you know, like bean stuff, you know, liquids and beans. And besides that, it adds a dimension of flavor. It helps make the meal more filling. A lot of things in traditional Brazilian cuisine, the idea is to try to fill you up using less food. And farofa is a really good way to help do that, in addition to adding a dimension of flavor. But we'll talk about farofa in another video. If you're interested, let me know. Drop it in the comments or send me an email. If you're interested in knowing more about farofa, enough people chime in, I may just show you how to make some homemade farofa. But this farofa I bought at the Brazilian store because I was just feeling lazy. Let me go ahead and try some here. If the feijoada alone isn't enough to bring me down memory lane, growing up, visiting Brazil, having feijoada, the farofa totally brings it home. I can say that much. It's funny because as a kid, I really wasn't that much into farofa. And then as a young adult, I think I was about 18, suddenly I started to love farofa in context. So I got feijoada, rice, and farofa, all in the same bite here. Big old bite. Let me tell you about this feijoada. It has a smooth flavor, a little bit salty, of course, because I use salted meats in there. It's smoky from some of the ingredients, a little bit gelatinous from the fat of the pork. Everybody knows that when you're cooking, all the flavor is in the fat. And being that this is a bit of a fatty meal, there's a lot of flavor to be had in here. Between the ham hocks, the pig's feet, the pig's tail, you have lots of lovely flavor-inducing cuts of fat that are in your stew. And it just makes, I mean, I'm talking about it now, it's making my mouth water. Now I'm gonna go ahead and just take a slice of orange a bit because I'm feeling the richness of this, just to kind of break it up a bit. That's a good orange too. Nice navel orange. And what else to say about the falafel? Well, I can tell you, when I was growing up, my mother has never been a big fan of black beans. She definitely was never a big fan of feijoada. One, because, again, she didn't care for black beans. And two, because typically when you have feijoada, especially if you make it very traditional, it tends to be a bit on the salty side, and she wasn't much into salt. We always used very little salt when she cooked. So this wasn't really her cup of tea, as she would say. But she used to like to talk about the traditions of it and stories behind it. And something she used to tell me is how feijoada, typically when you make a feijoada dinner, you don't have it at dinner time. You kind of have it, you start it like in the mid-afternoon. It's kind of a late afternoon thing. Like right now, it's perfect. It's about a little bit before 4 p.m. If anything, I'm starting at just a hint late to eat this meal according to the rules of feijoada. And the reason why is because it's considered so heavy that if you eat it at a supper time or later, 6, 7 o'clock at night, then you're going to be going to bed with a really full, heavy stomach. Supposedly there's some health implications to that. And she would go as far as to say that she knew of stories. Some people with weaker hearts, or if they have any kind of heart issues, if they ate a lot of feijoada too late in the night, they may not wake up after going to bed. So I don't know if that's true or if that's something that she used to tell me because she didn't like it. Because I used to always like to eat late when I was a teenager. So maybe it was just a story to scare me into eating earlier, especially if it was something like feijoada. But whatever it is, that's the story. It is, I do know it's traditional. That's the thing. Feijoada is something that would normally be eaten on a Saturday or a Sunday, and especially if it's on a Sunday in Brazil. I mean, I don't know about now, but at least back in the day, you didn't really have a dinner. You had kind of a meal that was later than lunch, but earlier than supper, and that would be your big meal. You had it as a family. It was a big, big table full of people, some nice hearty food, and you spend like an hour or two at the table eating and speaking and bonding, and that's kind of it. And that was your meal. That was your big meal. So that's really it about the feijoada. It's really easy to make. It is a bit time consuming in that it takes a long time to cook, but the amount of effort you put into is actually not a lot. So easy, in fact, I'm gonna share a little secret with you. This is my first time making feijoada myself. Before this, the most I've done was I one time helped my sister-in-law make it a little bit, and all I was doing was cutting up meats. And that was when I was a teenager when that was going on. So it's nothing significant. I made it myself. I thought it came out great. And you know what? The next time I make it, which I don't know when it's going to be, but it's going to be even better than this time. For those who are watching that know feijoada and have it in their family, you probably have all these comments about, oh, we make it this way, or we do it this way, or we don't do this, or we do this instead. Again, I said this in other videos, cooking videos, region, family tradition, resources, all those things affect the way you make your feijoada. And there's really no wrong way to make it as long as the end product is a delicious, hearty bean and pork stew. Thank you so much for watching Starr Quality Kitchen. Be sure to like, share, subscribe, and stalk. Laters. That's so good. My taste buds are happy. My teeth are happy. My tongue is happy. My esophagus is happy. My stomach is getting happier by the moment. And my heart is just filling, absolutely filling with joy and nostalgia. And what we say in Portuguese is saudade. Saudade for my mother. Saudade is just a really beautiful way in the Portuguese language to explain how much you miss someone. Everything that I put into this video and getting the ingredients and visiting traditional Brazilian stuff has really made me miss my mom, but also appreciate all that she has shown me. For you, Mom, saudades.